Welcome to the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcasts, brought to you by Dietzo Man Productions.
It just was kind of depressing sometimes. And it was like a time in life thing. It was a thing you just had to get through. And one night, we all worked really late in those days, and there's obviously no Zoom or even email. And so people just, it was just standard. You just order out dinner, eat at your desk, and leave around 10 p.m., having been there since 9 a.m. And I had colleagues, we all just did this. And so one night I was in a colleague's office, Madeline Rivlin, who was a brilliant tax lawyer. And I was complaining about my life, all the things that were like wrong with my life. And she just was looking at me, kind of rolling her eyes, like, please. And finally she said, John, assuming just for the sake of argument that it is true, that everything you've done in your life has been a complete waste up until now, that actually is not a reason to waste the rest of it. And that was like some of the best advice I ever got.
Hey, this is Scott Townsend. Welcome back to the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast. And today I have with me, see if you remember this, page, was it 9? National Honor Society semifinalist, honor student in the chapter of the National Honor Society, distinguished as National Merit semifinalist. Was the editor of the Nautilus, and he hasn't strayed far from his what he was doing in high school. Seems like he's just doing more of it now. John Sare. John, how's it going?
All right. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So where are we? Where are you coming to us from?
I am coming to you this morning from Germantown, New York, which is about 104 miles north of New York City. And it's where I have a weekend house that has been more or less my permanent house during COVID. I still maintain an apartment in New York, but I'm here a lot. And I've had this house for many years. And it's a wonderful getaway from the city.
So, yeah, that's awesome. I was looking at your bio here. So you're a lawyer practicing in tax exempt. I'm going to read this because I'll get it wrong. Tax exempt organizations, trusts and estates, art and museum law, which that sounds really interesting. State attorneys general and family offices. Looks like you went to Columbia Law School. You were graduated, or you were the editor, so that's fine. That's what I meant by not being straying far from your high school roots there. Editor of the Journal of the Law and the Arts at Columbia. And graduated summa cum laude at the Southern Methodist University.
Right.
When I graduated, it was Lottie, how come? But that's an old joke. And then he was by Phi Beta Kappa. So there's a lot to cover there, man. What have you been doing since high school?
Well, I've been having a pretty good time, I would say, across these many years. It's kind of hard to believe it's 40 years. I'm sure that's true for everybody. I was sort of doing the math and saying, well, if there were about 300 of us, I think there were more than that, times 40 years, that's 12,000 years of living that have gone on since we walked up on that stage at the auditorium downtown. Right. That's a lot of years, and a lot of things can go on. But after that first summer out of high school, I went to SMU and really actually loved being there. I wasn't so sure I would love being there. I really kind of harbored fantasies of going east, but my parents didn't see it that way. And so I went to SMU and actually had a wonderful experience and time there, and was editor of the daily campus there, and there have been other College High people who had been editors at the daily campus before me. People from a few years back, like Giles Hudson, and earlier than that, Karen Potter, I believe, had gone to SMU, had been an editor of the daily campus at SMU. And I finally did that my junior year. I was a journalism major, but I was also an English major. And in some ways, I discovered a subject I'd never heard of before called art history while I was there. And in some ways, I I wish I'd had an art history degree too, but two, I guess, was enough. And I sort of made up for the art history other ways later on. But anyway, I edited the Daily Campus, which was lots of fun. Then I got a job as an intern at the Dallas Morning News. And I worked there on the city desk as the junior guy on the city desk from the summer of '85 until the summer of '87, a little over 2 years that I was there. And because I was the most junior person, I had to do a lot of the scut work. And so I spent a lot of nights sitting in the Dallas City Hall in a room called the Cop Shop, where we were supposed to listen to the police radios, see what's going on. Every couple hours, I call up the homicide division and say, "You all got anything good going on tonight?" Sometimes I would call the morgue, "Anything going on I need to know about?" And that wasn't every night. That was just some nights because I was temporary, because I was an intern. They didn't really give me any specific beat. I kind of filled in for the people who were the real beat reporters. And the real beat reporters on the city desk at the police station at the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Times-Herald were some real characters. And that was a good education. It was a good education in dealing with difficult situations because, you just haven't really experienced life, or you've gone out to the scene of a homicide and tried to interview the surviving family members, interview the homicide detectives, interview witnesses. And I was like, 21, 22 years old and, going out and doing this. And I'd go back to the city desk with my pathetic quotes and they'd say, no, you need to ask harder questions and you need to be stronger about it. So there was a real process because I was sort of a polite small town kid. This was not what I was really raised to do. But eventually I really kind of got into it and enjoyed doing it. And I covered a lot of other things too, besides crime, but there was a lot of crime. And plane crashes, parades, elections, just foolishness too. And over the course of it, I managed to interview Wade of Roe Against Wade on the telephone once. And I even met Roe, and she wouldn't consent. She wouldn't come back for the interview. She disappeared after the event that she was at, the woman known as Jane Roe. But Wade was the Dallas County District Attorney even in the 80s. And I interviewed him briefly. Time or two.
That's cool.
So anyway, it was a good adventure, and pay was lousy. And if I were going to stay with it, I would have had to basically submit to being some kind of a beat reporter in the burbs, which I really didn't want to do. And I'd gotten into law school anyway. I got into law school, my senior year at SMU, and deferred it for a year so I could work. And then, and so everybody with the Morning News knew I was going off anyway. And that actually was like a great thing because they didn't have to consign me to the Mesquite Bureau or the Hearst Euless Bedford Bureau. I was working downtown, with the big boys, and it was fun. Yeah. So then I then knew I was going to law school, went to law school, arrived at Columbia, Morningside Heights, in August of 1987, and began Columbia? A whole new adventure. Columbia is in the Morningside Heights part of Manhattan, so it's at 116th and Broadway. And I'd been to New York a few times during college. SMU had in various ways arranged for me to be able to go to New York for journalism things and English department things, and so I really, Columbia was always my kind of a number one choice of where to go to school because I so wanted to be in New York and be part of New York things, theater and museums and things like that. And Columbia had a tradition of its alumni doing things in arts related ways. And so that, and it was a good place to be. And for that purpose, there was a Center for Law and the Arts, so I could take classes in law and the theater and a seminar in law and the visual arts. I took copyright with Professor Jane Ginsburg, whose mother was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so, and Jane is a very eminent copyright scholar in her own right. The intelligence she got from both sides of her family, she's a brilliant person. And so, there was this wonderful exposure to the law and the visual arts and law and the arts generally there, which then laid the foundation, that plus the law itself. I was doing regular law too. I was doing contracts and civil procedure, property law and income tax, just like everybody else, and plus this other stuff I could do on the side. And then after in law school, when you're in law school, you do these summer clerkships, and or work at a law firm, and they pay you a lot of money to do nothing except go to lunch. And so I did a set of those in Dallas, and at Vincent Elkins and Aiken Gump down there in the summer of '88, which was great fun. Never eaten so well in my life. And then the next year, I did my summer internship at a law firm called Milbank, Tweed, Hadley, and McCloy in New York. And Milbank is a wonderful old New York firm. It had and has a great trust and estates department. And I decided that trust and estates, which is, it's basically estate planning writ large. I mean, it's a lot of different kinds of work for your individual clients, would be an interesting place to be, in part because the individual clients did a lot of work in the arts and philanthropy generally, and that was of interest to me. And so I worked at Milbank and became a partner there. I mean, I was there really from 1989 until 2004, working on Wall Street. And, I look back at it in retrospect, and I think of it as kind of a golden time. There was a lot of hard work and a lot of very challenging personalities and situations, but also like a tremendous amount of fun. It was just really interesting having that window into the world of wealthy, powerful people and institutions. And so I enjoyed doing the work. Intellectually, the work was interesting too. I think my colleagues were great. Then I had an opportunity to become a partner at another firm in 2004. And that's when I moved to my current firm, Patterson, Belknap, Webb and Tyler, where I've been for the last 18 years. The vast majority of my clients, by the time I changed, were nonprofit institutions. I had some individual clients, and for those I usually did their philanthropic and art-related work. A lot of them were doing a lot of work in with foundations and things. But I also represented lots of big institutions doing cultural things, museums and other kinds of institutions. And so many of those clients came with me, virtually all of them. And so I ended up with sort of the same work I've been doing. And so I sometimes joke that for the last almost 32 years, I've had one job. I've just done it in two different places. So.
That's awesome. So what made you decide to kind of major or focus on the art and museum law, getting into the arts per se?
It's several different things. I mean, I always had kind of an instinctive interest in the arts, and literature and whatnot. I mean, I was a very happy, taker of English classes at College High. And, even though I did the journalism stuff, but I was specifically interested in the arts aspects of it, even when I was doing the journalism. And I think nobody in these segments that I've watched some of them, I haven't watched all of them. I don't think anybody has mentioned the Nautilus to speak of, but, we had this amazing teacher, Edith Hicks, who was one of the most remarkable people I've ever known or worked with. And she was a tremendous inspiration, and also sort of made you feel like garnering knowledge and writing about it in a persuasive, interesting, engaging way was maybe like the highest calling in the world. And so it was a great thing to be tutored by Edith, and we all called her Edith. That was perfectly understood, and she and I really bonded. I kind of made a point of getting on her radar even before I arrived at College High. I was down there in the summer before 10th grade, hanging out, trying to meet Edith Hicks.
Oh yeah, and
make sure she knew who I was. So when I got there, I was like a known quantity, and then she'd go out for a smoke between classes. And that was before they made that addition on the north end of College High, and there were steps back there. And we go stand out there, sometimes blisteringly cold or blisteringly hot weather, and she'd smoke her cigarettes and lean down and speak in this very soft voice, this kind of cigarette voice. She always thought she sort of sounded like Lauren Bacall, kind of did. And we talk about what we've been doing in class. I loved her, and I loved that class. And I love the way that she was sort of taking me into her confidence all the time. And one of the guests that came to speak to class in this period was a man called Brendan Gill. And Brendan Gill was the theater critic at the New Yorker. And because I was interested in these things, I knew perfectly well who Brendan Gill was very keen to meet him. He'd just written a biography of Frank Lloyd Wright called Many Masks, and he was on the publicity tour. And so, of course, he came to Bartlesville to talk about his Frank Lloyd Wright book, because, of course, the Price Tower is there. And there was a retired English teacher called Betty Turk, who was kind of shepherding him around town. And Betty Turk brought him to Mrs. Hicks's class, and we got to interview him. And I just could not stop asking questions, to the point that Mrs. Turk finally asked Edith to please get me to shut up. But I mean, to me, like, the chance to talk to the theater critic from the New Yorker was like the most thrilling thing I could imagine. And
Right.
But I think he was a little tired of my theater questions. He wasn't really there to talk about what was playing on Broadway that season. And but I was interested then. And I got to SMU, and I discovered that not only was I interested in the arts, but I also was like really interested in nonprofit institutions. And I discovered that I really liked being part of the university, and I got to know the president of the university, and the vice president for finance, the vice president for university relations, and the vice president for legal affairs. I got to know them all because I was so interested in the life of the university and the way universities were put together. I knew a lot of deans, and it was like, you know, I had discovered that this was a world I liked being in. And a friend of mine says that, you know, that I'm an institutionalist. And I think by nature, being part of an institution like that appealed to me. And so I think working in the arts has been a sort of a process of being part of any number of institutions, and helping build institutions and sustain institutions, and really being part of figuring out things like, you know, the capital campaign, the development of collections, politics of the board, all that stuff. So it was a I don't know, it was a way of like learning about yourself, learning what your aptitudes are, and that happened to be one of mine.
I looked on the page, everybody watching, listening, get your yearbooks out. Page 126. I can't, is that Edith?
There's Edith, yes.
Yeah.
You know,
So, yeah.
I probably wrote that. I don't remember, but she developed cancer in my junior year, and she had lung cancer. The smoking, you know, caught up with her.
Yeah.
I thought she was tremendous. I thought she was tremendously old because she was 59,
Wow.
an age that I would be in a year. But she, you know, I thought, oh my God, that's so old. Anyway, she was, you know, she had memories going back 40 years. You know, imagine that. And so, but she had been a heavy smoker for decades. That's how you get that Lauren Bacall voice.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a great show. The way that she had lung cancer, and she tried to teach, but it was difficult. We had a lot of substitute teachers my junior year. I would go see her sometimes, you know, at her house, or she would sometimes come in, and then, but she was completely unable to teach senior year, and Darla Tressner came in then. And then my recollection is Edith died in February or March of '82, and hence that in memoriam there.
Oh, okay.
And it was a sad thing. It was such a great figure in College High and in journalism.
Going back to Bartlesville, so we'll get back. We'll get in the time machine here, and let's jump back to Bartlesville. Growing up, were you born in Bartlesville? Did you?
I was born at Memorial Hospital downtown.
Oh, wow.
And my parents at the time were living in Dewey, but my father was from Bartlesville and had been born in Bartlesville in the 30s. And my mother was from Barnstall, a ranch outside Barnstall over in Osage County. And her parents were living in Bartlesville by the time I was born. And so I'm not quite sure why we were in Dewey. My father, who always was, you know, investing in things, buying buildings and things, he had some buildings up at Dewey, I know. And then I was transported to Bartlesville, I think about the age of 2. And then, you know, lived there until I left in 1982.
Right. So growing up, elementary school, which one did you go to?
Southview. which was is Southview. That's where I started. It's a little school. It's still there. I don't know if it's still open, but it's down around. It's where is it? It's like 21st Street or something. It's sort of the south part of the old part of town, south even of College High, and it was only for kindergarten through third grade, if I recall correctly. And so I went to kindergarten, first and second grade there. Mrs. Wegner, Mrs. Ballard, and then Mrs. Ingersoll were my teachers. I got along best, I think, with Mrs. Wagner and Mrs. Ingersoll. I remember tension with Mrs. Ballard. And then we moved to the corner of 13th and Osage, which was really where I grew up. In that house, we lived down on a street called College View when I was at Southview. And then I went
Is that
to
the White House? The White House on 13th and
the square columns.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you live near there, I think, right? And
no, I lived out in. We lived out in. Well, actually, yeah. When we first moved here, we rented a house from my dad's brother on Armstrong for a couple of months, and then we ultimately moved out to Oak Park. Went out to Oak Park Elementary.
Okay, yeah, but I lived there. Paul Dismang lived a block away. I watched his segment. I noticed he mentioned me, and he mentioned that, like, you know, we kind of lived near each other. We did. He lived the next corner up, if I recall correctly, on Dewey and 13th.
Who was that?
And Paul Dismang.
Oh yeah.
And so we lived there, and I went to fourth and fifth grade at third, fourth, and fifth grades, I should say. No, correction. Third and fourth grades. This is Anita Boone, and fourth grade was a Mr. Owens, and Mr. Cox was the principal.
So Boone, this was all at Garfield?
Oh, Garfield, yeah. Yeah.
What did you think about Garfield?
Well, I thought it was kind of scary because it was so big. And the students were a little bit more diverse, shall we say, than had been the case at Southview. And so there was a little more economic diversity, and therefore there was more tension, I would say. Plus we were older. You know, you get older and the kids are much more like poking at each other. And it was like it just seemed enormous to me too. It just seemed like such a big place, because Southview was like a little low-rise one-story building, you know, and so I'm in this building with these enormous stairs and echoing hallways. In those days, part of what you hear echoing the hallways was the sound of the students being paddled, and, you know, corporal punishment was permitted, and I dare say encouraged. And so, you know, you were out, you know, with your pass to go to the drinking fountain between classes, you'd hear somebody getting, you know, thwapped in the hallways. And it was the only time I was ever subjected to corporal punishment by the Bartlesville Public Schools. But I would stairs at lunch hour in the building when we were supposed to be outside. And so the deal was, you know, I was running up the stairs, and these girls were running down the other side, and we would sometimes we'd meet in the middle, but we were trying to find each other on these different levels of stairs, the front and the back of the building. And so one time I came running down the stairs thinking I was going to encounter the girls. Instead, I encountered Mr. Cox, and he had come to trap us, basically. And so he took me and another guy, and maybe the girls too. I think he took all four of us to the office, and we all got spanked with a wooden paddle. And we were supposed to be quiet in the cafeteria, and then we were supposed to go out and play softball in some seasons, and the colder seasons soccer. And if you talk too loudly in the cafeteria, you can put on the wall. There was this big retaining wall, and so I didn't want to play softball and didn't want to play soccer. So I thought this was perfect. So I would just talk too loudly, get in trouble, and then get put on the wall. Eventually people got onto me for this, that I was kind of twisting the system a little bit. But anyway, and then of course Garfield closed because they were going to tear it down to build a community center.
Right.
And then we going to McKinley. And so I did 5th and 6th grade down there. And I 5th grade was with the wonderful Irene Stewart, who was a terrific lady and teacher. Then 6th grade was with Anita Boone, who had, no, that's not right. Correction. I had some classes with Anita Boone, not as many as I wanted. She had come from Garfield, where she taught 3rd grade. She'd come to McKinley and was teaching 6th grade. And I took 1 or 2 classes with her, but the way it was organized, I was mainly with a teacher called Mr. Floyd, of whom I did not have the highest opinion. And so there was a lot of tension between him and me. But anyway, we got through that. And then 1976, I discovered my fondness for theater and I played the mayor in the 6th grade operetta called The Trouble with Christmas. I was the mayor who, I think if I remember correctly, canceled Christmas in a small town and then got his comeuppance. We did a bicentennial play, and I played George Washington in a polyester suit. And then it was like a blue houndstooth, as I recall. It was the strangest wardrobe choice. But anyway, I think I used tube socks as stockings. Anyway, then I went to Central, and of course then it was the great melting pot again. It was like this Garfield times 7. It's people from all over the western town convened there, and did my 3 years there. Then I could go on.
Yeah, that's a good memory. I remember, I've said this before on the podcast, Garfield. Oh my God, I just hated it. I just couldn't get out of there fast.
It felt there was something about it that was oppressive, and I'm not quite sure why. It was just like an old building that just felt like a place.
It's like a prison. Yeah.
And everybody was always getting in trouble. It was real strict disciplinarian sort of set up there. And I didn't love Garfield.
Seems like it was raining every day. Gray clouds.
Well, that's how I remember Columbia Law School. But I'm sure it wasn't, but that's how it felt.
Oh yeah. Going to College High, what's probably one of your fondest memory? When you think of College High, you think of the class of 82, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
It may be the class of 81. I spent more time with members of the class of 81 than I spent with our class. And it was one of those things that, like, I got involved in the speech program, which was really like speaking and theater, and a lot of the people I did that with were in the class ahead of us. Oh, okay. And so by the time I was a senior, like 3 or 4 people who were really like my best friends had graduated and were in college. And so I'd given up the speech stuff because I was going to be the editor of the Nautilus, and I knew I didn't have time to do speech and go to tournaments and do all that and get the grades I wanted and run the Nautilus. So I'd given up speech. And plus Bob Touchstone and we also kind of had our tensions between one another. One gets the sense sometimes I either had like tense relationships with teachers or like great relationships with teachers.
So what was it about Touchstone that kind of rubbed you the wrong way?
Sometimes he actually kind of called me out more for some of my antics more than other people did. So it probably just annoyed me that he was like, challenging me in that way. So it was partly that. And in ways that would probably not go down so well in 2022, he was fonder of the female students by far, and they were really fond of him. And so it was a kind of flirty atmosphere between Touchstone and some of the female students. And that was, and I obviously was not part of that. So it was kind of like, he's not, he's not nice to me particularly. So there are a lot of other stories. I don't mean to suggest there was anything improper by the standards of any reasonable person today, but it was just different. And whereas I had a great relationship with Edith Hicks, and we really were just, I don't know, just sort of made to be friends with each other. And I had a very good relationship with Dan Simmons, who taught English and led us through texts that at the time seemed very, very challenging. My first Shakespeare was with him, reading Macbeth, and I feel like I then did Hamlet as some kind of independent study or something. I think that's right. And we read Great Expectations, I believe, and Beowulf and whatnot. And he was one of the more challenging teachers. George Love is somebody a lot of people have mentioned, and I appreciated how hard he made his work. And it was really we were forced to learn a lot. And I will say, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm not sure how much of it was factual and how much of it was his opinion of the way the world worked, but it was certainly a lot of stuff we had to master to get through that class. And it took a lot of time. Like it was a real, and people were terrified of that class because everybody knew you were going to have to read a lot of material, take a lot of notes, write a lot of note cards, memorize a lot of stuff.
Right.
What is it I've spent the last 40 years basically doing? That's basically what I do all the time. Is I don't do use notes anymore, but I read a lot of stuff. I take a lot of notes. I write a lot of things. I spend a lot of time on it, and I use a little bit. He would say. I think the first time I ever heard the expression was from him. That sometimes people say my opinions are the right of Genghis Khan. He would say that, and but certainly it was intense and fun in its way. I took world history and American history with him, and all good training for the life ahead.
Who was your gang? Who were your friends that you hung out with in high school?
Well, in our class, Brett Thomason and I were both doing the journalism thing, and so we spent time together. Because of the speech things, I spent time with Sandy Yeager and with Allison Holmes, who graduated a year early.
Right.
And Sandy and I had jointly worked on the junior high play, a play we did at Central in the 9th grade under Mr. Redmond, which was called Hey Teach. And it was a play set in a high school, and Sandy played the teacher. I'm not sure I was even on stage in that, quite frankly, but I was certainly involved in it. And so we were working on those things kind of in that period. And then so that was part of the group. And then, as I said, there were people that were a year ahead of me in the class of 81 that I was friendly with, Steve Middlebrook, Tom Morris, Monica Velgas, and some other people who were like, kind of the theater speech crowd to some extent. And I was very busy. I didn't socialize. Like, I wasn't the kind of guy you were going to find at the Sonic or the canteen, or I just wasn't there. I was either at school working on the Nautilus until they closed the school every day at 5, or I was at the Bartlesville Examiner Enterprise, mocking up the paper, because we would get it set downtown at the EE, as we called it.
Right.
And or I was reading, or listening to music or whatever. I was kind of solitary in that way. I don't think anybody's going to have any tales of me out, at drunken parties, and
carousing.
Yeah. John Lacey was somebody I would see sometimes because he was in the neighborhood. I remember after some play we did, I think it might have been Hey Teach in the 9th grade, that he had a cast party at his house. And the Clearys were my neighbors. And so I, spent some time with the Clearys. Celeste, who's a couple of years junior to us, and then Karen and their brother Kevin, who's no longer with us. And so I hung out with them. In my neighborhood, there was a family called the Moores, and Susie Moore might have been in our class. I think so. And she had several siblings, including a guy called Mike Moore, and who
Yeah,
worked
Susie
for
Moore.
years. Yeah, but Mike Moore worked for years and years at the bookstore out at the Washington Park Mall, and I would see him out there. So he sadly died a few
Oh
years ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Mike, our neighborhood was like a funny little neighborhood. We were like an odd group of kids there, and so I had the Velgases down the block one direction, and the Moores down the next block the other direction. And we were all really interested in artistic things. And I remember being out on the yard like in 1979, and Mike Moore, who was I think 4 years older than us, and Neil Velgas, same age as Mike, they were out there talking about Woody Allen movies, and they were both making movies. And so they would make these like anywhere from 3 to 20-minute movies. And
That's cool.
They made one once called La Horrendous Ooze Creature, which was about a swamp monster that came up out of the Caney River and tried to eat Bartlesville or something. And and sometimes I was allowed to like write the musical score. I'd sit at the Moore's organ and like compose a score from my rather pedestrian piano training for these movies, including one about Mrs. Hicks and the Nautilus, even though I wasn't even at College High yet. But there's somewhere out there, somebody hopefully has the Super 8 film of Mrs. Hicks being interviewed and people talking about Edith Hicks at the Nautilus in about 1979. So I skewed old in that sense. I definitely skewed to an older crowd.
I was, if I were to describe you from what I remember, I was going to say I remember you as kind of an old soul. Maybe a little older than you were, kind of came off that way. And that's not bad. That's just, you seem to be a little bit ahead of us. I didn't really know what I was doing. You seemed to know what you were doing. And I think we were friends. I think we were friends.
No, we were. We definitely were. Yeah. No, I remember that. And but yeah, I don't know, I was in my own way. I guess I kind of am a bit of an old soul. I mean, I spend a lot of time, inhabiting the past imaginatively. My reading, I tend to read books, history books or books that were written in the past, if not about the past. I watch a lot of old movies. I travel extensively to look at historic architecture.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sort of somewhere about 1940 in terms of where I am in the world.
Just a few more questions here. What are you over the last 40 years? What are you most proud of?
I would say, the legal work that I've done that has made a difference in institutions, enduring institutions, and I've worked on a number of gifts and other transactions that have led to some important art collections and individual works of art coming to some of our major museums, important archives going to major museums, artists creating foundations to sort of perpetuate their legacies as artists, and endowment funds that have created various kinds of scholarly institutes at universities and museums. I'm very proud of that. I can walk around New York City, and to some extent other places in the world too, not just New York, but especially New York, and see, in the wall labels and the things that are on view, things that I touched in one way or another, that I helped make happen. And I've been doing this so long now. It's quite amazing to me how it's all mounted up. And sometimes I can be at the Met and look at a Met Museum, and I can see a wall label for a painting, and my name's not on it, but I know that like I did the legal work that resulted in that painting being at the Metropolitan Museum, and that's a very nice feeling that you've somehow contributed to something that endures.
Yeah, that's cool. Very cool. The flip side of that is, what's been the most challenging time in the last 40 years for John Sare? This is the Barbara Walters moment. This is the
Yeah,
Oprah Winfrey. I'm going to try to get you to cry here.
Yeah, that's not likely. But I think that the kind of just getting through the 90s was sometimes challenging. I've said earlier that like I look back on my days at Millbank Tweed as kind of a golden time, but it was also like a time I was working really hard. I felt like I was not going to make partner. I was just kind of generally unhappy with my station in life, and it was just really like, it just was kind of depressing sometimes. And it was like a time in life thing. It was a thing you just had to get through. And I went one night, we all worked really late in those days, and it was obviously no Zoom or even email. And so people just, it was just standard. You just order out dinner, eat at your desk, and leave around 10 p.m., having been there since 9 a.m. And I had colleagues, we all just did this. And so one night I was in a colleague's office, Madeline Rivlin, who was a brilliant tax lawyer. And I was complaining about my life, all the things that were like wrong with my life. And she just was looking at me, kind of rolling her eyes, like, please. And finally she said, John, assuming just for the sake of argument that it is true, that everything you've done in your life has been a complete waste up until now, that actually is not a reason to waste the rest of it. And that was like some of the best advice I ever got. The fact was that everything I had done was not a waste. I just was choosing to see it in a negative light because I was in a bad place. But it was, the bad place was taking me to a place of just saying, oh, hell with it. What's all this going to really amount to? And when she said that to me, that just because, even assuming it's true that your life has been a waste up until, that's no reason to waste the rest of it. It rang a bell for me. And
that's cool. Actually, I really like that.
1997 or 98. Not long before I became a partner. I became a partner in 2000. And I had lunch with her shortly before the pandemic in New York, and she now lives in the suburbs. And she came in for lunch with me one day, and I told her that story, and she had no memory of that good advice. But when I told her, she started to cry. And but it was just like one of those wise things people tell you. And I learned a lot from my colleagues at Millbank. There were so many things I still quote, various partners and associates saying to me, wise, witty, wonderful things. And another colleague of mine from Millbank, Jay Swanson, developed a saying that just remember, John, we only go around part of once. And that was another one that just it was like I don't know, somebody just slapped my forehead. Like, wow, think about that. But like we like to say, we only go around once, right?
Oh, you only go around once. Okay.
No, you only go around part of once. Part once. The brilliant insight of that statement is that it's never quite as long as you think it is. And you never really know what it's going to be, and you never really use what you've got fully. And so almost by definition, you only go around part of once. There's always going to be stuff you miss. There's always going to be stuff that didn't happen. And it's, to me, that's always been a kind of galvanizing thought. That if we only go around part of once, by definition, we're going to be disappointed. Some things are just never going to happen because we just never got to them. And some time that we think we might have because our life expectancy is X may not be there for us. And I've discovered in knowing really, really old people in their 90s, who I've been really lucky to know a number, including a friend of mine who's 99 and still going strong. And I was talking to him not long ago on the phone, and at 99, he was dealing with, he had COVID, since gotten over. But you could tell there was a tone of regret in his voice that, well, maybe this is it, and even 99 wasn't really all of it. And so I think that those kinds of ideas have really like animated me in my life, and kept me going through all kinds of difficult clients and difficult colleagues and just difficult situations. Whether it was 9/11 or the crash of 2008, both of which had like enormous effects on my personal, my work life. Really, I mean, I was fine. But like the COVID, whatever, all those things that those kinds of ideas have helped me a lot.
Well, I know you need to go here. I'm running up on the clock here. My last question, and we could go on. I got everything you just brought up brings up more questions I want to ask, but the last question, like I ask everybody else, is, what would you tell John Sare, 18-year-old John Sare, as he's walking across the stage, knowing what you know now? What would you, if you could meet yourself, knowing what you know now, what would you tell John? What advice would you?
I think it would be completely contradictory. It would be slow down and do more. And those things don't go together. Like, they just don't go together at all. But the fact is that, like, I always felt like this imperative to just kind of go and go and go. And as a consequence, there were times that I probably could have luxuriated a little bit, but I didn't. And like one of those times, what if I'd taken off a year, but rather 2 years instead of just 1 year between college and law school? Would it really have made that much difference in the scheme of things? Maybe not. And so, there's a side of me that's just trying to like enjoy what you have more. But that's also true on a day-to-day basis. I don't have to spend as much time doom scrolling as I do. I spend a lot of time doom scrolling, and it's a huge waste of time. It's like there's a lot of bad news in the world. There's more bad news in the world than there ever was before. But like you can slow down and do something like good rather than do something that's like not good. And that's the other side of it. That's the like do more of the things you want to do. And I've really embarked on a program lately of really trying to fill in some of the big gaps in my education. And there are things I could have done a long time ago but I was busy doing other things, and maybe the wrong things sometimes, in the sense of too much worrying about work or too much doom scrolling. But now I'm really trying to get them done. And so I think it's a constant process. I would have to tell my young self of trying to find that balance between like luxuriating and enjoying and appreciating what you have and what you're doing, giving yourself time and space, and not maybe being quite so negative about some of the bad things that are happening. And at the same time that you're giving yourself that space, use it really well. And do things that like other people wouldn't do. Mm-hmm. And I went to Europe for 4 months after I took the bar exam. I had no money. I was living on borrowed money, basically. Everybody thought I was crazy to do it. It was one of the best things I've ever done. 17 weeks with a backpack and not many thousands of dollars, traveling around Europe, and it was such a great thing. And so
that's awesome.
I think I look back at it now and I say, well, why didn't I do 6? It's like that like, why didn't I do a little bit more? So I don't know. I think I sort of joke that I also would tell my 18-year-old self, hydrate, don't get dehydrated, stretch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't tell you the benefits of stretching. The foam roller.
Oh, I believe I know it. I know it firsthand.
Of all time. Like, I almost had to have a knee operation and the foam roller and some Pilates, and it went away. I didn't need an operation. And so I think part of my lecture to my 18-year-old self was take care of your physical self. Yeah. It's not all in your head. A lot of it's in your head. A lot of it is in the way you orient yourself to the day's problems and whether you look at them with negativity or not. And getting the right balance on that more days than not. But taking care of the physical self. I want to make sure you laughed a lot. Like, to me, I look back at the decisions I've made sometimes, and like the best decisions were the ones that put me in places where there was a lot of laughter. And colleagues who I thought were funny, and we brought a kind of joy to the daily experience, partly through our capacity to make fun of it. And not undermine it, not destroy it. You didn't have to be a jerk about it, right? But you could certainly find the humor in it. And I think too, I look back and and again, these are choices where I feel like I made good decisions, and I look at them, I'm really grateful I made them. And I wasn't always aware I was making them. I think this had to do with like the way I was raised. I think it was something my parents kind of imbued in me. But like, it was important to me always to associate with people I thought were people of integrity and goodwill. I can't think of anything else really that has like made a bigger difference than like weeding out the rotten apples along the way, and really like maintaining that strong sense of who you are and what you're willing to do, and what your limits are and what's good for you. And that's like a very important skill. And I think it's really hard for adolescents to do it, of course.
Yeah.
And 18 is adolescent, right? It's still that, there's the scientists say that like the male brain is not grown and not fully formed until 26. And women get an easier path toward adulthood, evidently. And we see that throughout school as the girls are more kind of mature than the guys are.
Advanced.
But apparently there is now science that backs this up. And so I think it's important in the midst of all that to like really assess the quality of the thinking, the quality of the information gathering, therefore the quality of the facts, the moral compass of the people around you, how well they know right from wrong, good from bad, how well you know those things. I think that's all really important.
Well, John, we could go on, but I know I got to let you go. It's been a blast visiting with you, and you brought up a lot of things that I'm going to enjoy thinking about today.
Okay.
And I like to slow down, do more. I like all that stuff.
And ponder that you only go around Bartlesville once. That one takes a while to sink in. But like, the more you think about it, the more it's like, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
What your colleague told you, you're just because maybe your life has been, or let's suppose that it has been.
Yeah. Even assuming for the sake of argument, this is the way lawyers talk to each other. Even assuming for the sake of argument that your whole life until now has been a waste, that is not a reason to waste the rest of it.
That's great. Yeah. I love that. But anyway, so John, thanks. I really appreciate it. Last of the Col-Hi Wildcats. This might be one of the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats episodes. We're winding this down. I think we might have two more maybe, and then I'm going to shut it down. So I really appreciate you getting in on this and spending time. I know you're busy, and I really appreciate it.
Well, it's fun to do it. I'm glad to get to do it. I've enjoyed watching the segments, and it's a real tribute to you personally that you've been able to pull this together. I think it's a wonderful way to reflect on our experience collectively and our many experiences, our 12 years.
Yeah. All right. Well, for John Sare, this is Scott Townsend. Thanks for watching and listening to the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
The Last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast is a Dietzo Man production. Visit the Last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 YouTube channel, listen on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
This podcast is made possible by our Patreon members, Butch Bolin, Ben Townsend, Mark Thompson, Sandra Yeager, and Christy Brooks. And by the generous donations made via the GoFundMe campaign